Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read The Philosophy of Composition by Edgar Allan Poe. I had now to combine two ideas of a lover lamenting his deceased mistress and the raven continuously repeating the words nevermore. I had to combine these, bearing in mind my design of variety at every turn, the application of the word repeated, by the only intelligible mode of such combination as that of imagining the raven employed the word in answer to the queries of the lover. And it is here that I once saw the opportunity afforded for the effect on which I had been depending, that is to say, that the effect of the variation of application. I saw that I could make the very query pronounced by the lover, that the first query to which the raven should reply, nevermore, that I could make the first query a commonplace one, the second less so, the third still less, and still on until the length the lover, startled from the original nonchalance of the melancholy character of the word itself, by its frequent repetition and by the consideration of the ominous reputation of the fowl that uttered it, it had at length excited to superstition and wildly propounded queries as a far different character, queries whose solution was, he has passionately at heart, propounds then half in superstition and half in that species of despair which delights in self-torture, compounds them not only together because he believes in the prophetic or demonic character of the bird which reason assures him in merely repeating a lesson learned by rote, and because he expresses a frenzied pleasure in so modeling the question as to receive from the expected nevermore, the most delicious because of the most intolerable of sorrow, perceiving the opportunity thus afforded me, or more securely that has forced me upon the progress of the construction, I first established in mind the climax or concluding query, that query in which nevermore should be in the last place in answer, that query in reply to which the word nevermore should involve the utmost conceivable amount of sorrow and despair. Therein, the poem may have said to have beginning and the end, where all works of art should begin, where it is for here at the point of my preconsiderations that I first put pen and paper in the composition of the stanza. Prophet, said I, think of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, but that heaven and bends above us, that God we both adore. Till the soul was sorrow laden within the distant Aidenn, it shall clasp a sated maiden with the angels named Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore. Quote the raven nevermore. I composed this stanza at this point first that by establishing the climax I might the better vary and graduate as regard the seriousness and importance the preceding queries of the lover, and secondly, that I might definitely settle the rhythm, the meter, and the length and general arrangement of the stanzas, as well as graduate the stanzas which were to proceed, so that none of them might surpass this in rhythmical effect. I have been able in the subsequent composition to construct more vigorous stanzas. I should, without scruple, have purposely infetted them, not as to interfere with the climactic effect. And here I may as well say a few words of the verification. My first objection, as usual, was originality. The extent to which this has been neglected in verification is one of the most unaccountable things in the world. Admitted that there is little possibility of variety in mere rhythm, it is still clear that the possible varieties of meter and stanza are absolutely infinite. And yet for centuries no man in verse has ever done or ever seemed to think of doing an original thing. The fact is that originality, unless in minds of very unusual force, is by no means a matter, as some suppose, or impulse or intuition. In general, and to be found, it must be elaborately sought, and although of positive merit in the highest class, demands in its attainment less of invention than negation. Of course, I pretend to no originality in either the rhythm or the meter of the raven. The former is trochaic, the latter is octameter acolectic, alternating with hexameter catalectic, repeated in the refrain of the fifth verse and terminating with the terameter catalectic. Less pedantically, the feet employed throughout tchotchkes consist of a long syllable followed by a short. The first line of the stanza consists of 8 of 3 feet, the second of 7.5, in effect 2/3. The third is 8, the fourth is 7.5, the fifth is the same, and the sixth 3.5. Now, each of these lines taken individually have been employed here, and what originality the Raven has is in their combination into stanzas. Nothing but even remotely approaching this combination has ever been attempted. The effect of this originality of combination is aided by either unusual and some altogether novel effects arising from the extension of the application of the principles of rhyme and alliteration. The next point to be considered was the mode of bringing together the lover and the raven. And the first branch of this consideration was the locale. For this, the most natural suggestion might be in the forest or in the fields, but it was always appeared to me that a class conscription of space is absolutely necessary to the effect of insulated incident. It has the force of a frame of a picture. It is an absolute moral in keeping concentrated the attention, and of course must be confounded with the mere unity of space. I determined then to place the lover in his chamber, in a chamber rendered scarcely to him by memories of her who he had frequented it. The room is represented as richly furnished. This is mere persuasions of the idea I have already explained in the subject of beauty and the sole true poetical thesis. The locale being thus determined, I had now introduced the bird, and the thought of introducing him through the window was inevitable. The idea of making the lover suppose, in the first instance, that the flapping of the wings of the bird against the shuddering of the tapping of the door originated in a wish to increase the prolonging the reader's curiosity and a desire to admit the incidental effect arising from the lover's throwing upon the door, finding all dark, and thence upon the half fancy that it was the spirit of the mistress that knocked. I made the night tempestuous, first to account for the raven seeking admission, and secondly for the effect of contrast with the physical serenity within the chamber. I made the bird a light to the bust of Pallas, also for the effect of contrast between the marble and the plumage, and it being understood that the bust was absolutely suggested by the bird, the bust of Pallas being chosen first as most in keeping with the scholarship of the lover, and second with the sonorous of the word Pallas itself. And in the middle of the poem, also I have availed myself to the force of contrast with a view of deepening the ultimate impression. For example, as an air of the fantastic, approaching as nearly to the ludicrous, was as admissible is given to the raven entrance, he comes in with many a flirt and a flutter. His next least obeisance made he, not a moment stopped or stayed he, but the main or lord of lady perched above the chamber door. In these two stanzas which follow, the design is more obviously carried out. This is ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance. It were, though they crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven. Ghastly grim and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore, tell me what thy lordly name is in thy night's Plutonian shore? Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore, for we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet with blessed was seeking bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, within such name as nevermore. The effect of the denouncement being thus provided for, I immediately dropped the fantastic for the tone of a most profound seriousness, this tone commencing in the stanzas directly following the last one, quoted with the line, but the raven sitting lonely on the placid bust spoke only, etc. From this epic of the lover, not longer jest, no longer seen anything even of the fantastic in the raven's demeanor, He speaks of him as a grimly, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore, and feels that the fiery eyes burning into his bosom's core, the revolution of thought or fancy on the lover's part is intended to induce a similar one on the part of the reader and bring the part into the proper frame of the denouncement, which is now brought about as rapidly and as directly as possible. When the denouncement proper, with the raven's reply nevermore to the lover's final demand, as he shall meet this mistress in another world, this poem in its obvious phase, that is a single narrative, may be said to have its completion. So far, everything is within the limits of the accountability of the real. A raven, having learned by quote the single word nevermore, and having escaped from the custody of its owner, is driven at midnight through the violence of the storm to seek admission at the window from which a light still gleams, the window chamber of a student occupied half in poring over a volume, half in dreaming. Over a beloved mistress deceased. The casement being thrown open at the fluttering of the bird's wings, and the bird itself perches into the most convenient seat out of the immediate reach of the student, who, amused by the incident and the oddity of the visitor's demeanor, demands of it, in jest and without looking for a reply, its name, the raven. Addressed, it answered with its customary word, nevermore, a word which finds immediate echo in the melancholy heart of the student, who, giving the utterance aloud, its certain thoughts suggested by the occasion, as again startled by the fowl's repetition of nevermore. The student now guesses the state of the case, but is impelled, and I have before explained, by the human thirst of self-torture and in part of superstition, to propound such queries to the bird, as well bring him, the lover, the most of the luxury of sorrow through the anticipated answer, nevermore, with the indulgence to the extreme of this self-torture. The narration, in what I have termed its first or obvious phase, has a natural termination, and so far as it has been overstopping of the limits of the real, but in subjects so handled, however skillfully, or with however vivid an array of incident, there is always a certain hardiness or nakedness which repels the artistical eye. To things are inevitably required, first must some amount of complexity, or more properly, adaptation, and secondly, to some amount of suggestiveness, some undercurrent, however indefinite, of meaning, and it is this latter in especial which imparts to the work of art so much of that richness, to borrow from the colloquy of forcible term, which we are too fond of confounding with the ideal. It is the excess of the suggested meaning. It is the rendering of this upper instead of the undercurrent of the theme, which turns into prose, and that of the very flattest kind, and so-called poetry of the so-called transcendentalists. Holding these opinions, I added to the two concluding stanzas of the poem their suggestiousness being made to pervade all the narrative which has preceded them. The undercurrent of meaning is rendered first apparent in the lines, "Take thy break from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. I, quote the raven, never more. I." It will be observed that the words "from out of my heart" involve the most metaphorical expression in the poem. They, with the answer "nevermore," dispose the mind to seek a moral in all that has been previously narrated. The reader now begins to regard the raven as emblematical, but it is not until the very last line of the very last stanza that the intention of making him emblematical and mournful and never-ending remembrance is permanently distinct to be seen. And the raven, ever flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. All his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming thrown his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that flies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. That's the end of Edgar Allan Poe, verse 1, volume 1. We'll go into volume 2 in another day. I would like to read another poem. by the Bronte sisters, not Charlotte, but Emily Bronte. This is called The Prisoner. In the dungeon crypts idle did I stay, reckless in the lives waiting there away. Draw the ponderous bars open, wanderer stern. He dare not say me may, the hingress harshly turn. Our guests are darkly lodged, I whispered gazing through the vault whose grated eyes showed heaven more gray than blue. This was when glad spring laughed in awakening pride. Ah, darkly lodged enough, returned my sullen guide. Then God forgave my youth, forgive my careless tongue. I scoffed at the chilling chain of the damp flagstones rung. Confined in triple walls, art thou so much to fear that we must bind thee down the clench, thy fetters, hero? Here. The captive raised her face, and it was soft and mild, as scuffled, marbled, stained, or slumbered unweaned child. And so soft and mild, and was so sweet and fair, pain could not see trace of line, nor grief of shadow there. The captive raised his hand and pressed it to her brow. I have been struck, she said, and I am suffering now. Yet these are little worth, or bolts and iron strong. And they forged in steel, they could not hold me long. Horse laughed, the jailer grinned. Shall I be one to hear? Does think fun, dreaming wench, that I shall grant the prayer? Or better still, wilt melt my master's heart with groans? Or sooner might the sun thaw down these granite stones? My master's voice is low, his aspect bland and kind, but hard as fittest flint the soul that lurks behind. And I am rough and rude, yet not more rough to see than his hidden ghost that has gone in home to me. Although about her lips there played a simple and almost scorn. My friend, she gently said, you have not heard me mourn. And when you have kindred lies, my lost life can restore, then may I weep and sue, and never friend before. Still, let my tyrants know, I am not doomed to wear, year after year in gloom, in desolate despair. A messenger of hope comes every night to me and offers the short life, eternal liberty. He comes with western winds and evening wandering airs, that with that clear dusk of heaven that brings the thickest stars. Winds take a pensive tone and stars a tender fire, and visions rise and change and kills me with desire for nothing known of my mature years, when joy grew mad with awe and contained future tears. When my spirit's sky was full of washes warm, I knew not whence they came, from sun or thunderstorm. But first a hush of peace, a soundless realm descends. The struggle of distress, fierce impatient ends. Mute music soothes my breast, unuttered harmony, that I could never dream till earth's let me be. Then dawns the invisible, the unseen it's true, reveals. My outward sense is gone, my inward essence feels. Its wings are almost free, its home, its harbors found. Measuring the gulf, it stoops and dares the final bound. Oh, dreadful to the cheek, intense the agony, when the ear begins to hear and the eye begins to see. Then the pulse begins to throb, the brain begins again, the soul to feel the flesh to feel the chain. Yes, I would lose my sting, would wish no torture less. The poor the anguish racks, the earlier it will bless. The robes in fires in hell are bright with heavenly shine. It is but herald death, the vision of divine. She ceased to speak, and we, unanswering, turned to go. We had no further power to work the captive woe. Her cheek, her gleaming eye declared the man had given a sentence unproved, unruled by heaven. That's The Last of the Prisoner by Emily Bronte. We'll get to volume 2 of Edgar Allan Poe's work another day. If you enjoy anything I'm doing, like and subscribe, and have a nice day.